What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Friday, November 17th edition of the NBA Lineup Generator video. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoneyDFS. We have a big 11-game NBA slate tonight on this Friday heading into the weekend, and we're going to use the NBA Lineup Generator to walk through the slate for both DraftKings and FanDuel, as we always do, showing you how to use this tool if you're not familiar as well. If you really don't know anything about the tool, the NBA Lineup Generator is a way to get access to our player projections, ownership projections, and simulation models. And then you're just getting the end results. It's going to present you with individual lineups, and kind of similar to a dating app, you can take the ones you like, get rid of the ones you don't, until you end up with up to 20 lineups that you can export to DraftKings or FanDuel. It's perfect for you if you're a single entry player, 3-max player, 20-max, anything in that range. It is a very useful tool, and it's not expensive. So it's perfect for you if you're a lower volume player as well. I'll get more into that later, though. We're going to walk through DraftKings first, followed by FanDuel. But first, make sure you hit the like button on the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and hit the notification bell so you get notifications when we go live. If you're watching this video on Twitter, give it a like there as well. It really helps out a lot. Now, starting on DraftKings, the first option you're going to get with the lineup generator is to choose an ownership setting, all lineups, chalky lineups, balanced lineups, contrarian lineups. This is allowing you to give some input into the type of contest that you're playing. You can click all lineups and then just go through and decide for yourself what you want. But if you're playing smaller field stuff, you might want to just go with chalkier lineups or balanced lineups. If you're playing the largest field tournaments, maybe you want to go with contrarian. And I'll go with contrarian today for this video. The next option you have is to select a player to lock into your lineups. Now, this is not something I recommend doing if you're going to be playing multiple lineups. If you're playing a 20 max tournament, I don't recommend just locking somebody in. I recommend getting all of the lineups that you can and then going through and choosing the ones that you want to play. But maybe you're playing one lineup, you're playing single entry, you know that you want RJ Barrett in single entry. And so you may as well save yourself some time, click RJ Barrett here, and then you're only going to be presented with RJ Barrett lineups. So that is a pretty useful way to save yourself some time in some situations. I'm going to skip it for this video. And now we're going to get into the lineups. You can see here that you get the total salary, the player projection, the ownership projection at the top. Down here at the bottom, we have a sliding scale because, as most or a lot of you know, and if you don't know, you're about to find out, the projected fantasy points, the lineup ownership, these numbers are all relative. There's no such thing as a good fantasy projection or a good lineup ownership number. It matters what the alternatives are. And so down here at the bottom, you can see on a sliding scale where it projects and how ownership comes in. So this one is relatively contrarian and it projects really well. Looks like a really good lineup. And then you have each individual player here. You have their fantasy projection, their ownership, and then on the far right side with the arrows, this is another way that you can customize these lineups. You're getting lineups that project to be profitable over the long run based on our projections and our models. But maybe you don't like an individual player. You know, you look at this lineup and you really, really like the lineup. Everything looks good, but you really don't want Paul George here as an $8,600 guard. Just click these arrows. It's going to give you every player that's eligible at the guard position. Since you use the full salary, you need to go down and find anybody that's 8,600 or less. So you scroll down and say you want DeJounte Murray. You can see he projects 3 fantasy points lower. He's 1% owned. Maybe you just really like him tonight and you prefer him to Paul George. You just click that, click the arrows here, and he's going to swap in for Paul George. So that gives you another customization option as well. So now I'm going to just save the first 20 lineups that come up, and we can take a look at the exposures that we're getting to and how those lineups look by clicking this View Saved Lineups button. The next page is going to give you all of your saved lineups on the left and all of the information that we had before, your total fantasy points, your ownership. If you click it, you see the actual lineup and how the individual players look. But over here on the right, you get your player exposures, and that is going to allow you to see just, you know, who you're getting to amongst these lineups. Now here at the top, we have Devontae Graham at 50%. This is a really weird one. We don't know what the starting lineup is going to look like for the Spurs tonight. We do know that Trey Jones is doubtful and Devin Vassell is out. Keldon Johnson is probable to return. Now, last game, we got about 12 minutes outside of garbage time from Devontae Graham. We have him projected a little bit higher than that today, I think because of Vassell being out instead of Keldon Johnson. Now, that's something that may change as we get closer to lock, but it is there's just a lot of uncertainty. So the idea of playing Devontae Graham at low ownership certainly makes sense. But let's say you don't want 50%, which is a very, very reasonable take. You know, right now we have him projected for 4% ownership. So let's say you just wanted to get down to 25% Devontae Graham. You can click Devontae Graham's name here in the player exposures, and it's going to highlight and bring to the top all of your Devontae Graham lineups. So now you can go through these 10 lineups and decide which ones you wanted to get rid of. And for the sake of time, I'm going to just say I want to get rid of these first five. You could, of course, just go and do what I'd already showed you, where you go in, you click the arrows, and you grab somebody instead of Devontae Graham, or you swap Devontae Graham up to somebody, you swap somebody else down. But you also can just go in, discard these first five Devontae Graham lineups, and then what you're going to do, so now you have 15 lineups saved. You're going to go here to get more lineups, and it's back to the previous page where it's generating lineups for you. Now I'm just going to grab the next five lineups that don't have Devontae Graham. I'm discarding the ones that do because I'm trying to lower how much of him I have. And then we can go back and be, in the same position as before, but we will have our 25% Devontae Graham instead of 50%. We're still taking a nice stand on the field. It's a very reasonable approach to take, especially with players like Graham. There's some players where, RJ Barrett here, for example, we're getting 55% and we're over the field, but this is, a real player. He's questionable, but assuming he plays, we know his rotation. We know what his minutes are going to look like. He has a great matchup against Washington. Maybe you are uncomfortable with 55% and you want to scale it back. I generally don't do stuff like that too often. But with somebody like Devontae Graham, where there's a ton of uncertainty, I don't necessarily want my night revolving around what the Spurs do with Devontae Graham, probably off the bench. So that's how you can handle that problem if you run into it. And now looking at some of these other guys, RJ Barrett again showing up a ton. That looks good. Good matchup with the Wizards. Anthony Davis at 10-1. We're getting 30% of him. That's really interesting to me, and that's a very contrarian play. You have Nikola Jokic on this slate. You have Joel Embiid on this slate. So neither of them are getting a ton of ownership, but they're both likely to be more popular than Davis. And we're just using Anthony Davis a lot. He's projected for 5% ownership. We have 30. Clearly, you're not going to be upset about getting to Anthony Davis as a contrarian play. Keldon Johnson at 30%, Terrence Mann at 30, Okongwu at 30, Gallinari at 30. So we're getting some value pieces here. Gallo probably playing around 18 minutes for the Wizards. Okongwu playing his normal role, backing up Clint Capella, but occasionally closing over him for the Hawks. Terrence Mann, I assume, moving into the starting lineup since it came out today that Russell Westbrook will be moving to the bench. Keldon Johnson with no Devin Vassell, clearly going to look good. We have D'Anthony Melton, Paul George, both showing up 25%, along with Graham, who obviously we had cut back. Paul George, another contrarian play here. Maybe a little bit more production, playing fewer minutes alongside Russell Westbrook, but also just a dropping price tag and still a very talented player. And then we're rounding out our highest owned guys here with Kevin Huerter, Michael Porter Jr., Jordan Clarkson. Now looking at the individual lineups, only 56% aggregate ownership to this one, a 250 fantasy point projection. So pretty low owned across the board. Every player in this lineup is sub 10% on DraftKings with the exception of a 15% owned Mitchell Robinson, but still a reasonable 250 fantasy point projection that's in line with a lot of these other lineups. Now we are going to do the same thing on FanDuel, taking a look at that site rather. Obviously different pricing, different roster construction should get you some different names. But before we get into that, if you are interested in using this tool, it is $14.95 a week. You can sign up using the link in the description below on YouTube. You can sign up using the link that I will post below this on Twitter. And it's $14.95 a week. It is perfect for you, like I said before, if you're a single entry player, 3 max, 20 max, a lower bankroll, lower volume player. Obviously the goal or the ideal would be using the full Sims tool, but that just doesn't make sense for a lot of people. It's $200 a month. And if you're playing, for example, the $4 20 max and, the $3 or $20 3 max, stuff like that, you're putting yourself in a really, really big hole to climb out of, no matter how good you are, no matter how good the tools that you're paying for are, if you're outlaying that kind of money just to get access. So we designed this with, our lower volume players, single entry, 3 max, 20 max guys in mind. $14.95 for the week gets you access. You can use it up until lock. And there are some customization options, like we already said. You're getting lineups that project to be profitable in the long run. So it's the most cost-effective way at the end of the day to get access to our player projections, ownership projections, and simulation models. Highly recommend signing up if you haven't already. Now we're going to take a look at FanDuel. Same thing. Going to go with contrarian lineups here. Skip the locking in any players and grab the first 20 lineups that we get to. And we'll see, how things look different, how different things look than they did on DraftKings. And at the top, we have D'Anthony Melton, 5,600, showing up in 70% here. He is projected to be the third highest owned guy on FanDuel at 30%. So we're quite a bit over the field there, but he does look like one of the better plays. Again, we have Devontae Graham at 50%. There's a lot of volatility here. Same thing I said before. I already showed you how to go through and remove some Devontae Graham lineups if you wanted to. I don't need to do it again, but same kind of thing. I probably don't need 50% of him. PJ Washington showing up in 40% of our lineups. He is getting 22% ownership right now. Jayshawn Tate as a 4K value play at small forward showing up 30%, along with Jordan Hawkins at 30% and RJ Barrett at 30%. Damian Lillard, even with Giannis projected in, only $8,800 showing up 25% of the time, along with Evan Mobley, Giannis, Ingram, Herter, Olynyk. So we see pretty flat exposures here on FanDuel. And now looking at this first lineup that we got, one of the lower owned lineups in here, but also a very solid 295 fantasy point projection at only 84% aggregate ownership. We have Dame, we have Graham. Again, we've talked about Graham quite a bit. Jordan Hawkins also only 3% owned. D'Anthony Melton, Tobias Harris, Melton 30%, Harris 9%. Keegan Murray and LeBron James 4 and 6% respectively. 10% owned Olynyk and 5% owned Şengün. So again, we're seeing one of the nice things about these bigger 11-game slates. They can be a little bit overwhelming, but you can build very contrarian lineups that, for the most part, have good players. Obviously Graham, Hawkins, you can switch those guys around to better players if you wanted to, but pretty low owned lineup for a lineup that has Damian Lillard, LeBron James, Şengün, Tobias Harris. It's a lot easier to get low owned lineups on these slates, which is nice. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you for checking out the video. Don't forget to sign up using the link below and enjoy your weekend.